Stockholm in the 1600s was the beating heart of a rising empire, a city transformed from a medieval trading port into the capital of one of Europe's great powers. By 1650, Sweden controlled vast territories around the Baltic Sea, and Stockholm's population had swelled to nearly 60,000 people, making it one of Northern Europe's most important cities. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, engravings, and prints to life, allowing us to shift perspective, change camera angles, and move through the same scenes in ways their original artist never could. We'll walk cobblestone streets lined with timber houses, stand before royal palaces, and witness the daily life of a city caught between medieval tradition and emerging modernity. First, I want to talk about Gamla Stan, the old town. This view shows Stortorget, the great square by the early 1600s. Stortorget had been Stockholm's central marketplace for centuries. This view shows the square from its western edge, looking east toward the cluster of tall, narrow merchant houses painted in deep reds, ochres, and yellows. In the foreground, market stalls crowd the cobblestone's wooden tables piled with salted herring, butter, and rye bread. Women in woolen skirts and white linen caps haggle with fishmongers. In the midground, a horse-drawn cart unloads barrels of beer from a countryside brewery. The spire of Storkyrkan, the great church, rises in the background, its copper roof green with age. The air smells of fish, wood smoke, and damp stone. The square was far from peaceful. Crowds could turn violent during food shortages, and petty theft was common. In November 1520, this very square became the site of the Stockholm bloodbath, when Danish King Christian II ordered the execution of over 80 Swedish nobles and clergy. Though that horror lay in the past, its memory haunted the square. Fire was another constant threat. The wooden upper stories of these houses were vulnerable, and blazes could spread quickly through the old town's narrow lanes. Winters brought bitter cold, and disease thrived in the cramped, unsanitary conditions. Stortorget mattered because it was the commercial and social heart of Stockholm. News travelled here. Royal decrees were proclaimed here. Merchants from across the Baltic, Germans, Finns, Dutch traders came here to do business. This was where Stockholm's wealth was made and displayed, where power and poverty stood side by side. Over time, the square evolved. The medieval houses were rebuilt in grander styles. The bloodbath was commemorated and then gradually forgotten. Markets moved to other locations as the city expanded. Today, Stortorget remains the center of Gamla Stan, surrounded by the same colorful merchant houses now home to cafes and shops. You can still stand on those ancient cobblestones and feel the weight of centuries beneath your feet. This is Trekrona, the Three Crowns Castle. By the 1630s, Trekrona dominated Stockholm's skyline. This view shows the massive royal castle rising from the northern edge of Gamla Stan, its medieval walls and towers crowned by three golden crowns that gave the fortress its name. In the foreground, boats unload cargo at the castle's waterfront, timber from Finland, iron from Sweden's mines, luxury goods from the continent. In the midground, guards in blue and yellow uniforms stand at the main gate. The building is a mix of medieval fortifications and Renaissance additions, reflecting Sweden's growing ambitions. Smoke rises from countless chimneys. The sound of construction echoes constantly as new wings are added. Life inside was both splendid and dangerous. The castle housed the royal family, the court, and the government. King Gustavus Adolphus ruled from here until his death in 1632 during the 30 Years' War. His daughter, Queen Christina, grew up within these walls. But the castle was also overcrowded, poorly heated in winter, and vulnerable to fire. Court intrigue was constant whispers of plots, shifting alliances, competition for royal favor. The risk of assassination or coup never fully disappeared. Trekrona was the symbol of Swedish power. From these halls, kings commanded armies that fought across Europe. Treaties were signed here. Foreign ambassadors came here to negotiate. The castle represented Sweden's transformation from a regional kingdom into an imperial power controlling Finland, Estonia, parts of Poland, and northern Germany. Tragedy struck in May 1697 when a catastrophic fire destroyed most of Trekrona. Only the northern wing survived. The blaze raged for days, consuming priceless artworks, archives, and royal treasures. On the ruins, the current royal palace was built, a massive Baroque structure that still stands today. But you can see remnants of the original castle in the palace's northern section, and in the castle museum beneath, where medieval walls and vaulted chambers survive as echoes of the fortress that once ruled an empire. This view shows Riddarholmen, the island of knights. By the mid-1600s. Riddarholmen had become the burial place of Swedish royalty and the home of Sweden's nobility. This view shows Riddarholmskyrkan, the church with its distinctive cast-iron spire, rising above the island's western shore. In the foreground, noblemen in plumed hats and long cloaks walked toward the church for a funeral procession. In the midground, aristocratic townhouses line the waterfront stone buildings with high gables and leaded windows. Boats ply the water between Riddarholmen and the mainland. The air is cold and damp, smelling of the sea. The island was a place of power and privilege, but also competition and resentment. Sweden's nobility grew wealthy from lands granted by the crown, from positions in government, and from the spoils of war. They built mansions here to display their status. But tensions simmered between the aristocracy and the monarchy over who truly controlled Sweden. The church became increasingly crowded with elaborate tombs and monuments, as kings and queens were laid to rest beneath its vaulted ceiling. Riddarholmen mattered because it represented the Swedish nobility's role in the empire's rise. These were the families who commanded armies, governed provinces, and advised the crown. The island was a reminder that royal power depended on aristocratic support and that support could be withdrawn. The church still stands as Sweden's royal burial church, filled with the tombs of kings from medieval times through the early 20th century. The old noble palaces have been converted to government offices and courts of law. Today, you can walk across the bridge to Riddarholmen and visit the church where Gustavus Adolphus, Queen Christina, and dozens of other Swedish rulers rest beneath ornate sarcophagi. This is Skeppsbron, the ship's wharf by the 1640s. Skeppsbron was Stockholm's busiest waterfront. This view shows the long quay stretching along Gamla Stan's eastern shore, crowded with ships from across the Baltic and beyond. In the foreground, longshoremen haul crates and barrels onto the docks. Wooden cranes swing cargo from ships' holds. In the midground, three-masted merchant vessels are moored alongside smaller fishing boats. Warehouses line the street behind the quay, their doors open to reveal stacks of goods furs from Russia, grain from Poland, wine from France, spices from Amsterdam. Seagulls wheel overhead, their cries mixing with sailors' shouts in Swedish, German, Finnish, and Dutch. The waterfront was rough and dangerous. Fights broke out between crews from different nations. Customs officers struggled to prevent smuggling. Disease often arrived with ship's plague, typhus, smallpox. The winter ice locked the harbour for months, strangling trade and leaving sailors stranded. Fire was a constant fear. The wooden ships and warehouses packed with flammable goods created a tinderbox. Skeppsbron was vital to Stockholm's economy and Sweden's empire. This was where raw materials arrived to fuel Swedish industry: iron for weapons, timber for shipbuilding, tar for preserving ships' hulls. This was where Swedish exports left for foreign markets: iron, copper, and tar that paid for Sweden's wars. Control of Baltic trade was a key reason Sweden fought for dominance in the region. Over centuries, Skeppsbron evolved. The wooden warehouses were replaced with stone buildings. Modern port facilities moved elsewhere, but the waterfront character endured. Today, Skeppsbron is a grand boulevard lined with historic buildings. Ships still dock here now, cruise ships and tourist boats rather than merchant vessels. You can walk the quay and imagine the forest of masts that once filled the harbour. This view shows Södermalm, the southern island by the 1650s. Södermalm was Stockholm's working-class district, separated from Gamla Stan by a narrow channel. This view shows the hillside rising steeply from the water, covered with small wooden cottages and workshops. In the foreground, ferries carry people and goods across the channel, workers heading to jobs in the old town, farmers bringing produce to market. In the midground, smoke rises from countless chimneys. Narrow paths wind up the hill between houses. Children play in muddy alleys. Laundry hangs from windows. The smell of cooking, animal waste, and industrial work, tanning, brewing, blacksmithing fills the air. Life on Södermalm was hard. The houses were cramped and poorly built, vulnerable to fire and collapse. Sanitation was primitive. Water had to be carried from public wells or the harbour. In winter, the cold was brutal. Disease spread quickly in the overcrowded conditions. Crime was common: theft, assault, drunken violence. The city authorities largely ignored Södermalm, focusing their attention and resources on Gamla Stan and the Royal District. Södermalm mattered because it was where Stockholm's workers lived: the carpenters, blacksmiths, sailors, servants and labourers who kept the city running. It was also where industries too dirty or dangerous for the old town were located: tanneries, slaughterhouses, breweries. Without Södermalm's people and workshops, Stockholm's wealth and power would have been impossible. Over time, Södermalm grew and transformed. In the 19th century, it became a district of tenements and factories. In the 20th century, it gentrified into one of Stockholm's trendiest neighbourhoods. Today, Södermalm is known for its cafes, boutiques and artistic scene, but you can still find narrow lanes and old wooden buildings that hint at its working-class past. especially in areas like Fjällgatan, where the steep hillside and historic structures survive. This is Slussen, the lock by the 1640s. Slussen connected Gamla Stan to Södermalm and Lake Mälaren to the Baltic Sea. This view shows the primitive wooden lock and bridge system at the narrow point between the lake and the saltwater. In the foreground, boats wait to pass through the lock barges carrying timber and grain from the interior. Fishing boats heading out to sea. In the midground, people cross the bridge on foot and in carts. The lockmaster's house stands beside the mechanism. Water rushes through the gates when they open, creating dangerous currents. The smell of salt water mixes with the fresh water from the lake. Slussen was a bottleneck and a hazard. The wooden lock was constantly in need of repair. Winter ice could damage or destroy it. Boats sometimes capsized in the turbulent water. Disputes broke out between boat operators competing for passage. Flooding was a recurring problem when storms pushed Baltic waters up into the lake, or spring meltwater overwhelmed the lock. Slussen mattered because it controlled access between Stockholm and the vast interior of Sweden. Lake Mälaren stretched west for over 100 kilometers, connecting Stockholm to Uppsala, Västerås, and the agricultural heartland. Goods and people flowed through Slussen in both directions. It was a choke point for trade, a strategic vulnerability, and an engineering challenge. The wooden lock was replaced and improved many times over the centuries. A stone structure was built in the 1750s. In the 20th century, a massive traffic interchange was constructed here. Today, Slussen is being rebuilt once again, a controversial modern design replacing the mid-century structure. But the essential function remains, connecting the lake to the sea, the city centre to the southern island, managing the flow of water and movement that has always defined this spot. This view shows the German church, Tyska Kirchen. By the 1660s, the German church had become one of Stockholm's most distinctive landmarks. This view shows the church rising in the heart of Gamla Stan, its ornate Baroque spire topped with a gilded crown. In the foreground, German merchants in fine wool coats and fur-trimmed cloaks walk toward the church entrance. In the midground, the church's red brick facade and tall windows dominate the narrow street. The sound of organ music drifts from inside during services. The building is surrounded by German-owned shops and houses, creating a distinct enclave within the Swedish capital. The German community was both essential and resented. Germans had settled in Stockholm since medieval times, bringing skills in trade, mining and craftsmanship that Sweden lacked. They controlled much of Stockholm's commerce and held privileged positions. But native Swedes often viewed them as foreigners who took wealth from the country. Tensions flared periodically, especially during economic downturns or when nationalist sentiment ran high. The German church mattered because it symbolized Stockholm's international character and economic dependencies. Sweden's empire was built partly on German expertise mining engineers who developed Sweden's copper and iron industries, merchants who connected Swedish goods to European markets, artisans who brought new technologies and techniques. The church represented both collaboration and competition, integration and separation. Over time, the German community gradually assimilated into Swedish society, though the church remained a focal point for German cultural identity. The building survived the Great Fire of 1625 that destroyed much of Gamla Stan. Today, Tyska Kirchen still holds services and remains one of Stockholm's most beautiful churches. You can enter and see the ornate Baroque interior, the carved wooden galleries, the elaborate pulpit, the royal pew that German craftsmen created in the 1600s. This is Kungsträdgården, the King's Garden by the 1650s. Kungsträdgården was a royal pleasure garden, just north of the castle. This view shows formal gardens laid out in geometric patterns, gravel paths between planted beds, topiaries trimmed into precise shapes, fountains and statues imported from the continent. In the foreground, members of the court stroll along the paths, ladies in elaborate gowns, gentlemen in silk coats, attended by servants. In the midground, the garden stretches toward the water's edge. Beyond, you can see ships in the harbour. The scent of flowers mixes with the smell of the sea. The garden was a symbol of royal power and sophistication, modelled on continental gardens that Stockholm's monarchs had seen during travels abroad. But it was also exclusive closed to ordinary Stockholmers, reserved for the court and their guests. This exclusivity bred resentment among the city's growing middle class and common people who were denied access to this green space in their crowded city. Kungsträdgården mattered because it represented Sweden's cultural aspirations. The garden showed that Swedish royalty could match the splendour of Paris, Amsterdam or London. It was a place for courtly entertainment, outdoor concerts, masques, celebrations of military victories. It demonstrated that Sweden was not just a military power, but a sophisticated European state. Over centuries, the garden transformed from royal enclosure to public park. By the 1800s, it was open to all citizens. Today, Kungsträdgården is one of Stockholm's most popular public spaces, a place for concerts, festivals, ice skating in winter, and cherry blossom viewing in spring. The formal geometry is gone, replaced by more natural landscaping, but the location remains a green heart in the city centre, still bordered by historic buildings that recall its royal past. This view shows the city walls and fortifications. By the 1630s. Stockholm was expanding beyond its medieval core, and new fortifications were being built to protect the growing city. This view shows the earthwork bastions and stone walls on Norrmalm, the northern district. In the foreground, soldiers drill in the open space before the walls, pikemen and musketeers in blue and yellow uniforms practicing formations. In the midground, the fortification walls stretch east to west, studded with bastions that allowed artillery to cover the approaches. Cannons point outward, guards patrol the ramparts. Beyond the walls, you can see open farmland and forest. The fortifications were expensive and never quite adequate. Stockholm's position on islands and peninsulas made it difficult to defend comprehensively. The walls required constant maintenance and updating as military technology advanced. Keeping a garrison fed, paid, and disciplined was a perpetual challenge. In winter, soldiers suffered from cold and inadequate housing. These defenses mattered enormously during Sweden's century of imperial wars. Stockholm was the strategic center. Lose the capital, lose the empire. Though Stockholm was never seriously besieged during the 1600s, the threat was real. Denmark and Russia both coveted control of the Baltic, and Stockholm represented the ultimate prize. The fortifications allowed Sweden to project power knowing its capital was secure. As Sweden's military power waned after 1700, the fortifications became obsolete. The walls were gradually demolished in the 1800s as the city expanded and the need for defensive works disappeared. Today, almost nothing remains of Stockholm's 17th century fortifications. A few street names and the layout of certain districts hint at where the walls once stood, but the earthworks and bastions are gone, buried beneath modern Stockholm's streets and buildings. This is Blasieholmen and the emerging aristocratic quarter. By the 1670s, Blasieholmen was being developed as a fashionable district for wealthy nobles and merchants. This view shows the peninsula jutting into the harbour east of Gamla Stan, where grand townhouses were rising along newly laid-out streets. In the foreground, construction workers build a stone mansion, masons cutting blocks, carpenters raising roof timbers, carts delivering materials. In the midground, completed houses display their wealth-tall windows, elaborate doorways, decorative gables. Small gardens are being planted. The aristocratic owners wanted proximity to the castle and government, but space and fresh air that Gamla Stan couldn't provide. Development here was speculative and risky. Building on reclaimed land and marshy ground required expensive foundation work. Some buildings sank or cracked. Financing construction was difficult, and several projects went bankrupt. There was also social tension. Common people resented seeing prime waterfront land reserved for the wealthy while working-class districts remained overcrowded. Blasieholmen mattered because it showed Stockholm's confidence and ambition. The city was expanding beyond its medieval boundaries, creating new districts that reflected contemporary European urban planning. It demonstrated that Stockholm's elite had wealth to invest and expectations to match their status in a great power's capital. The district continued to develop over subsequent centuries, becoming home to museums, luxury hotels, and cultural institutions. Today, Blasieholmen houses the National Museum, the Grand Hotel, and other prestigious buildings. You can walk along the waterfront and see the elegant architecture that evolved from those first 17th century mansions, still one of Stockholm's most distinguished addresses. This view shows the harbour in winter, frozen and transformed by the mid-1600s. Stockholm's winters were severe, and the harbour typically froze solid from December through March or April. This view shows the ice-covered water surrounding Gamla Stan, transforming the city into a landlocked fortress. In the foreground, people walk and skate on the ice. Merchants have set up temporary market stalls on the frozen harbour. Horse-drawn sleds carry goods directly across where boats sailed in summer. In the midground, ships are trapped in the ice, their hulls reinforced against the crushing pressure. Smoke rises from stoves lit on deck to keep sailors warm. The city is quieter now, no ship traffic, no harbour noise, just the crunch of footsteps on snow and ice. Winter brought hardship and danger. Trade stopped, strangling the economy. Food supplies dwindled and prices rose. Fuel for heating was expensive, and the poor suffered terribly. Fires were both more likely due to constant heating fires and more deadly, as frozen water couldn't be used for firefighting. Disease lingered in enclosed, poorly ventilated houses, but winter also created opportunities. The ice provided roads where none existed before, connecting islands, allowing direct routes across the water. Winter markets on the ice became traditional. Wealthy residents enjoyed ice skating and sleigh rides. The harbour's transformation was a reminder of nature's power and Stockholm's northern location. Over time, winters moderated slightly, and modern icebreakers keep shipping channels open year-round. Today, Stockholm's harbour rarely freezes completely. Climate change has made severe winters less common, but old Stockholmers still remember when you could walk from island to island on solid ice, and visitors can see historic paintings showing the city locked in winter's grip, a Stockholm that modern residents barely recognise. Standing here now, looking at these reconstructed images, it's remarkable how vividly the 1600s still speak to us. Stockholm's transformation from medieval trading town to imperial capital happened in just decades, driven by war, wealth, and ambition. The streets may have changed, the wooden houses replaced with stone, the harbour opened year-round, but the city's bones remain the same. You can walk through Gamla Stan's narrow lanes, stand before the royal palace, and feel the weight of that extraordinary century when Sweden reached across Europe and Stockholm became the capital of an empire. If there's another city, another moment, or another scene you'd like me to bring to life using AI reconstruction, let me know in the comments. I'd love to explore it with you. Again, thank you so much.